Today what we're going to be working on is going to be the graph of tangent. This is the last video for 4.5. And we're going to first start with the amplitude. There is no amplitude for the function because the range is infinite. A period of tangent, and I'll draw a period up, one period for you up here. We saw in the last video went from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. And the length between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2 is going to be pi units. If we want to get the length with an equation, that means we're going to do pi, our period, divided by b. So it's going to be a little bit different than sine and cosine. Our intervals, we'll do a period just like we did before, and we'll divide it by 4. Our vertical shift, we can move tangent up and down, but we're not going to focus on that though. If you did have one, it would be the d value, as it was in sine and cosine, and the horizontal shift will be a c over b value. Again, just like we did in the left and the right. Just like we did in sine and cosine. For the vertical stretch, that's going to be determined by a. And the starting x value asymptote. For our starting x value asymptote, we'll take our period and we'll cut it in half. Because notice that in between the middle of the period is going to be a distance of pi over 2 in either direction. Which means our asymptotes will be at the endpoints of that length. So to get our asymptote, that's going to be our period divided by 2. Let's go and graph y equals 1/4 tangent pi x over 4. Again, I'll take all the information that I had. The pi over 4 is going to be b, which means that my period is going to be pi divided by pi over 4. And when I do that math, I get it equal to 4. So my period length is going to be 4. Now, when I cut that in half for the asymptotes, I get 2. So on my graph then, I'm going to have a -2 for one side and a 2 on the other. And these are going to be my vertical asymptotes. Second, I have a 1/4 here. The 1/4 means that my y value is going to be 1/4 and -1/4. But remember, the range is infinite though. The 1/4 and the -1/4 will take place at the quote-unquote pi over 4 values. So here's how we get those. As I did in my sine and cosine graph, I'm going to take 4, the period, and divide it by 4. These are going to be for my intervals. And when I take 4 and divide it by 4, that means I'm going to get a value of 1. So I'm going to look at the individual tick marks here of -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Remember on the original tangent graph, at -pi over 4 and at pi over 4, value of 1 and negative 1. Those were for your y values. Those happen at the quarters. So my period was from negative pi over 2 to pi over 2. And my intervals here are in the period divided into quarters. And again, the period happens, the y value of negative 1 and positive 1 happen in between those values. Which means at negative 1, my y value will be negative 1/4. And at 1, my value will be 1/4. Right in between those two, at the origin, my y value will be 0. And I can connect the points as such. Let's go and take a look at the second problem. We're going to graph one period of y equals 2 tangent of 3x minus pi. The first thing I'm going to do for this problem is I'm going to take that 3 out. Now I can see how much I have to move the graph to the left or to the right. Second, I'm going to take the period, which should be the length of pi, but I'll divide it by my b value, which gives me pi over 3, b being equal to 3. To find the vertical asymptotes, I'm going to take pi over 3, I'm going to divide that by 2, and I get pi over 6. Which means my vertical asymptote should be at pi over 6. However, because I'm moving to the right pi over 3, I have to find my new locations. As a reminder, this minus pi over 3 is going to tell us the tangent graph is moving to the right. So what I want to do is I want to take a negative pi over 6, because that would have been my first vertical asymptote on the left, and add pi over 3 to it. Doing this math, I'm going to get my first left vertical asymptote will be pi over 6. My second vertical asymptote will be the positive pi over 6. My second vertical asymptote on the right will be a pi over 6, positive. I'm going to add pi over 3 to that, and I get 3 pi over 6, getting that common denominator, and I get pi over 2. So I drew in my vertical asymptotes. That's going to be for one full period, and the distance between those is pi over 3 if you subtract them. Now, I also want to find out my intervals. So the way I'm going to do that is I will take the period length, the pi over 3, and divide that by 4. When I do that math, I get pi over 12. But now I actually need to find out where that max and min are going to be. Not the max and min, but where my 2 and my negative 2 are going to take place. Because I do notice that I have a 2 here that's going to stretch the tangent graph a little bit by a factor of 2. I have to move pi over 12 to the right. So because I know that my intervals are going to be pi over 12, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my vertical asymptotes in terms of 12ths. I'm going to put 2 pi over 12. My pi over 2 in terms of 12ths, multiplied by 6, will be 6 pi over 12. So my intervals in between them will be a 3 pi over 12, a 4 pi over 12, and a 5 pi over 12. We know what happens in the middle. 4 pi over 12 will be at the x-axis. At 3 pi over 12, we'll get a value of negative 2. And here's my actual x-axis, or my y-axis. And at 5 pi over 12, I'll get the y value of 2. I'll connect them. And that's going to be your graph of the function. Thanks for watching, guys.